Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From a Woman to a Leader. Today, we're going to talk about the journey to becoming a CPO, Chief Product Officer, with Navya Rehani Gupta. And just a little bit about Navya. She is the Chief Product Officer at Peak.com, and she's responsible for scaling the industry-leading Peak Pro platform, also known as Shopify, for the experiences economy with over $1 billion in annual bookings and over 10 million customers annually. So, hi, Navya, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate that. And Navya and I know each other from the mentoring program I started at Power to Fly. So it's always great to reconnect again. And thank you so much for finding the time in your early morning to speak with me today.
I'm glad we could make it.
Yeah. So let's maybe first start and talk about what is the role of a CPO. What does it entail?
Yes, for sure. So a chief product officer is a C-level executive that has a responsibility of making decisions at that have a company-wide impact. So the real difference between a VP of product or any other product leadership role and a CPO is that the CPO is making business level, company level decisions, not just at the product level, including understanding deeply the current financials, the priorities of the shareholders, the customer perspective, the market perspective, and really helping to drive decisions at that level. So CPOs typically have the authority and responsibilities to drive overall growth and overall profitability of the company, of the customers. It is a strategic role, but in many ways, it's a tactical role as well. And there are areas, like every CPO is different. So there are areas that each CPO is spike in, but at an overall, what you would see is most of the time that the CPO would spend would be around company level strategic business priorities.
And Navya, can you share your journey and how did you know that you wanted to become a CPO and how you became a CPO?
For sure. So the journey started about 12 years ago. I was in business school and I was taking a class called Women in Business Leadership. At that time, I got a project from the instructor to create a 10-year career plan, which is a daunting exercise. I don't know about other people, but in my 20s, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But some of the pointers that I used were that I knew that I had a passion towards technology. So I wanted to move out of financial services, get back into tech. But I'd also heard about Sheryl Sandberg, and what she did sounded cool at that time for me. And it's, I still look up to her in many ways. So over the years, I successfully navigated my way back into technology companies from Wall Street. I had a strong passion for technology and building products. So I dropped a few titles along the way. I gave away my vice president management title to become an individual contributor to really work on my product craft. And through the years, when I came back to a VP, I happened to attend a webinar for women in product. And at that time, I first heard about the CPO role. And that brought back, my memory of, wanting to get to the C-suite. So I made it my mission to actually understand what a CPO does. I did a lot of research. I reached out to mentors. And, at that time, I worked at a startup. So I had to really advocate for myself and get the founders to educate the founders on what a CPO would do at the company. So that was on its own a 2-year journey to create a case on why adding a CPO role at the startup is beneficial for the startup, and it's also aligned with my career goals, right? So, and I worked with the founders to come up with initiatives and milestones for me to hit to become a CPO. So, as I reflect into all these years, as I go back to my class at business school to, now being a CPO, for me, the key learning is to advocate for myself. I advocated for myself to create a role. I don't think over the years I've ever gotten any promotion or any raise for that matter that didn't require me to raise my hand. So if there's one thing from my journey that I want people to take away is to not be shy about advocating for yourself.
And wow, this is so important. And thank you so much for saying that. Because so many women, and including myself, I must admit, at the beginning of my career, think that speaking up, is maybe vanity, is maybe, rude. And we try to shy away from asking for things. We just want to do a good job and someone will notice us and promote us. And sometimes it happens, but most cases it doesn't. And I actually hear several things from what you say. First of all, you consciously made a decision that you wanted to go into tech and you want to go into product, right?
Correct.
Then you were willing to pay a price for that. You were willing to take a step backwards in order to take eventually many steps forward. And you said that you returned to be an IC to learn really what it is to be a product manager before you can grow to a VP role. And then
Correct.
you created the CPO role.
Yes, it was a 12-year journey in 12 less than 12 minutes. So yes,
Yeah,
those are all, thanks for summarizing those key points.
those are really important. Yeah. So, what would you advise to women that want to become like you, that want to become CPOs? And maybe they are product managers right now. Maybe they are in engineering. I don't know. What should they do?
For sure. So, I mentioned this before about advocating for yourself. That is very, very important. The other couple of tips that I would have is, I would generalize and say that a lot of women want to do good work, but they go dark. So, I personally had a tendency to put my head down, go dark, and just keep doing what I think should be doing, as opposed to making my work visible. That's the common problem that I see in women, right? So what I would, again, in addition to self-advocacy, is making sure that the impact of your work is visible to others. Around career planning, I have a couple of tips there. So the first one would be to work on the business, not in the business. Again, for product managers, we're problem solvers, and it is very common for product managers to get obsessed with the customer problem that we want to solve. And what that leads to is PMs spend most of their time working in the business. So I've done a talk about this as well, around how to find the balance between zooming out and zooming in. So as you think about your career progression, it is really important to get that end-to-end business visibility. So you have to take time and break your habits around being in the business to actually step out, work on the business, so that you have an end-to-end business understanding that you can take to your leaders. And then finally, I would say, it goes back again to self-advocacy, but you have to make your aspirations known to others. And that's the best way for you to be even thought about when certain roles come up, when certain opportunities come up, when decisions are being made without you in the room. So those would be a couple of tips. I'm happy to elaborate on any one of them with tactical advice.
Absolutely. So, first of all, I would like to ask you about self advocacy.
Mhm.
Obviously, we need to say what we want, otherwise, people will not know. And I have multiple clients that told me that they almost lost opportunities just because they never spoke up. And then there was an opportunity they wanted. They say, hey, why am I not, considered? And I said, well, I didn't know you wanted that role. So it's super, super important. But I also have clients that despite vocalizing what they want, they always get skipped. I don't know if you face that personally, but what would someone do if really, because women, a lot of times there are biases against us. I can share personally, there were biases against me. I had to really fight to get to some roles. Do you have any tips?
For sure. And I 100% agree with you that women leaders want to advance, but they actually face stronger headwinds than men. women, I do believe, have to work extra hard to come across as strategic. And there's a good article around, around even lessons about how not to use that feedback and say, hey, she's not strategic, right? Because it's really not helpful. But it is not uncommon to hear that a woman is highly valued in her operational excellence. But when the decision comes to say, is she a right fit for an executive role, the whispers actually start where people start to say, oh, she's not strategic. And then the woman gets passed over, right? And so now as a leader who sits in these calibration and promotion conversations, I hold my peers accountable and I ask them, like, how do you think this person could have achieved this level of excellence if they weren't strategic? So I think a part of it is training the people who are, have that bias. But for women who are in that role, who are facing that bias, a couple of things that I would suggest is, first of all, be true to your values. And if the company is not a fit, right, there's only so much you can do. So I see a lot of people struggling in companies that are not in a good fit. Obviously, you have to be conscious of the economic conditions, but, really, I've made choices in my career where things weren't a good fit and I walked away, and I'm very happy about those. The other things you can do is get sponsorship. So it's very common for women to have mentors, but I do think that women are over mentored and less sponsored. You want people in the room when the conversations are happening to actually be that person who talks about you, so that you're not, and it doesn't have to be a manager. It could be somebody else in that power. You want somebody there to advocate for you and actually bring you up, but also set you up for success. So that would be another tip. And then the final one around what we spoke about earlier, you have to earn your trust from the mentors and the sponsors. You have to earn your place, but you have to make it visible. So if you are continuing to work hard, but people don't know about it, it doesn't matter if you have the right company. It doesn't matter if you have a right sponsor, if your work is not visible. So it goes back to always zooming out and saying, what am I doing to make my impact most visible?
Absolutely. And you mentioned sponsorship, and this is so critical. And I had sponsors myself that really supported me. Do you have some tips about how do you even get a sponsor? How do you find one?
Yeah, I can tell you a bit about my experience. So I would say the people who've had the most impact in my career in really leveling up from a sponsorship perspective are either former bosses. You work for somebody, the teams move, you continue to stay in touch with them, and that's been a big source. The other one has been people who I heard, speaking up in conversations, and me just reaching out with very specific asks. So the ask wasn't, "Hey, I want you to be my mentor or sponsor." It was, "You said something to on this conversation that resonated with me, and it actually helped me to do X." So giving very specific answers, and then saying, I would love to have a conversation with you to get advice on a very specific ask, right? So being specific around how they've helped them, what you're looking to get from the conversation, and hopefully what you can do in return for them, right? Like always asking, is there anything I can do for you? And I would say that's a starting point. Beyond that, it has to be a connection that works both ways, right? So ultimately, it's you invest in the relationship, knowing that it might not lead somewhere, right? So you have to go in with an open mind, but continue to nurture relationships with your former bosses, with people who who've shown trust in you, who've responded to your email, and a handful of those sponsors will then, before you know it, will be the active voice in the room when decisions are being made about you.
Wow, so many great tips. And definitely, eventually, it's all about building relationships with people, right? It's getting harder, though, I think, in this era when we all work virtually. Because it used to be much simpler. You walked into an office and you can offer someone, hey, maybe let's go to lunch, maybe let's get some coffee. and it was kind of easier to do, a little bit less formal, to build those relationships. And now it's getting a little bit harder because you actually need to proactively reach out to someone in Slack or schedule a meeting so you can actually talk to them.
Mm-hmm. I agree, but I also think in some ways it's helped. And I say that because, for women, especially who have, personal responsibilities, getting out in the evenings for after work events was quite difficult, right? And I passed on myself a number of those happy hour invitations because I had responsibilities at home, or I am an ambivert, and in some cases putting myself out there was quite difficult, right? So in some ways, if remote is here to stay for your situation, what I would recommend is to think of creative ways, right? And think of creative ways to engage. I wouldn't recommend it saying, hey, let's have a virtual coffee without any specific asks, right? But really being thoughtful about how you reach out to that person, right? I've done that myself. I've honored many virtual coffees because of specific asks that I get. So I would say, really nurturing the positive side of remote and finding how that you can make it best work for you would be the advice I would give here.
Absolutely. And this is a great advice. And you are right. I mean, obviously, with remote, there are a lot of benefits, especially for working parents. And I would say that one sentence really opens up a lot of doors, at least for me. I need your advice on something. So when you reach out to someone and you want to build with them relationship and you say, hey, would you be open to having a conversation? I really want to hear your perspective on something, or I really want to ask for your advice.
Mhm.
Usually people feel very kind of honored that you chose
Mhm.
them, that you want to hear their opinion.
I totally agree. And even in that conversation, starting off with what the thinking that you already have done, right? So as opposed to asking for what should I do with my career, it's saying, hey, I've done some thinking, and what I've realized is I'm really good at X, Y, and Z, and what really matters to me is this and this. How, if you were me, how would you navigate getting to the next level, given the constraints and challenges that I'm facing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely want to be perceived as a thought leader, right? Not just someone clueless asking, out of nowhere, nothing, you don't know anything. And I also wanted to touch base on what you mentioned about, when you worked in office, it was harder for you as a mother, to attend those um, after working hours, drinks. And also, to be honest, not everyone likes to drink and not everyone connects to those activities. They are very usually muscular activities, right? Going to a bar, a lot of times sport bar, a lot of kind of muscular kind of thing. Any tips you have as a working mother? How do you balance it out, right? Because a lot of women think it's impossible to have kids, to raise a family, to be a good mother, and also thrive in
Yeah, for sure.
career.
So, the interesting story is that my husband and I waited for a very long time before we knew that we wanted to have kids, right? So I've now been known him for 20 years, right? And my kids are only like 6 and 3 years old. So a big part of my life was, without kids. And then I took this VP role at a startup as their product leader. And right after I signed the offer letter, I found out I was pregnant. Right. So it was like, I had no idea that I would be a startup mom. In fact, in my network, none of my mom friends or startup friends had the same experience. So people who were moms worked at bigger companies and people who were at startups weren't moms. So it was very intimidating. And I really learned by doing at that time. I knew I loved being at a startup. I knew I wanted to be, a working mom. So I randomly started reaching out to CEOs for advice because I just didn't have any friends, right? So I would go into, I remember I was 38 weeks pregnant and I randomly, I was at a product event. I reached out to the CEO and I said, could I just talk to you? I'm pregnant and I want to get your advice on this, right? So I would say I've really learned by doing and asking. But having been a working mom for now 6 years, I actually firmly believe that I'm a better executive because I'm a mom, not even though I'm. And I strongly believe because as a parent, you learn unique skills that are very important for executives. You learn to be selfless. You learn about ruthless prioritization. You learn how to negotiate better. You learn how to handle unplanned situations. So, my advice here for people who are navigating similar situations would be a couple of things. Pick where you work and who you work with. In my case, I happened to pick a startup that turned out to be very, very supportive, right? But it's important to have a supportive environment around you. The second one would be to really protect what matters. If there are things that you care about, you have to set clear boundaries. Otherwise, you will become resentful, right? And if it's a specific time in the day that you don't want to be out from work, if there are certain weekend activities, pick a short list and protect them. If you start to make sacrifices around them, it's not going to be helpful, and people will respect boundaries if you bring that up strongly. The other one would be to outsource what you can if you are able to, right? Get help. It really takes the village. And then finally, be comfortable that it won't be a 50-50 split. There will be times where work will become a big priority, and there will be times when your family will need you. So don't really, be particular about trying to get to 50-50, as long as you have a situation where work and family can be in harmony, not just balance. No, don't strive for balance, but harmony.
Absolutely. Those are incredible tips. And yeah, I would say from my personal experience, having four kids, it's all doable. And it's all, as you said, prioritize ruthlessly. You have to prioritize. And sometimes you have to sacrifice things, right? I mean, sometimes you have to sacrifice things that people do, like, I don't know, going out or, because you're too tired or doing other things. But you can make all of it work. And I think that as moms, we become better moms when we fulfill ourselves, when we're happy, when we are part of ourselves and what we achieved.
Totally. And it's very inspiring for the children too, right? To see that and to see how their parents are, engaged in work and actually really enjoy it. So full supporter there.
Yeah. And I wanted to go back to what you mentioned about product, if you may. You mentioned about to become, into executive roles, you have to work not just in the business, but on the business. So can you elaborate, especially, because I met so many product managers, a lot of them are very, very tactical, as you mentioned, right? They are focused about features, about hearing complaints from clients, about, okay, designing the roadmap. What kind of advice would you give them to work on the business?
For sure. And the big thing that I had to learn here was to tie what I was doing to financial outcomes, right? And it required retraining the mind, because product managers are problem solvers, right? So we're so obsessed with making the customers happy that it was a trained skill. And to do that, what I would say is, spend time understanding the financials. See what your finance team is working on. What are they thinking about from a financial perspective? And try to draw a clear line between your work and your team's work to the core metrics that the company cares about, right? And until you do that, don't stop asking the questions, right? And ultimately, you would be able to draw the line of what you're doing and tie it directly to customer outcomes. You might come up yourself with many other things you can do to move the needle for the company that isn't what you're working on, right? Or you might realize that you're working on a completely wrong thing, right? So I would say that keep asking the 4 whys, the 5 whys, especially if you're looking to advance in your career and get to product leadership. It is very important not just to be customer focused, but also to be business focused. And I've done a podcast. It's on my profile around product ROI that actually walked through this process, especially in this environment when investors care about profitable revenue growth.
Mm-hmm.
A conversation that I had with our board of directors about a year and a half ago was tying everything that my entire organization was doing in an ROI, in a return of investment model. And that's typically very hard because you're building product for the long term. You need to keep the lights on, you need to make the right strategic bets, but to actually put a number around here is the investment that we're putting in to see returns. What are the returns that we would get? Is it because customers will be happier, they'll spend more with us? Is it because we'll get more new customers? Is it because we're going to save on engineering costs? Like really going in and asking the 4 whys till you get there, but then also being clear on when those returns will come. Because with product, you can get returns sometimes very quickly, but sometimes it takes a while, right? So that would be my advice, which is draw the line between what you're doing to financial outcomes, not just customer outcomes, and then see if you can create a very clear ROI model that drives visibility into what you're doing and when the returns are expected.
Yeah, this is very important because, I can share that as an engineering leader, a lot of time I ask those questions to product because I ask them a lot of time, why do we need this? Why do we need this? I ask several whys. And sometimes product managers just, were puzzled. They didn't know exactly because a lot of times we tend to chase after the next shiny new thing. We're excited. This is a new technology, something new, something exciting. And we don't spend enough time to ask, okay, why are we doing that? What's the ROI? What's the benefit? What is it going to give us? Or what happens if we don't do that? Sometimes it's about if we don't do that, we're not competitive. So this is super critical.
Totally. And, as engineering leaders, if they're engineering leaders that are listening, don't stop asking the whys, right? The answer about if we would be more competitive also has to be quantified, right? Does that mean we're going to win more market share? Are there certain customers that will start using the product? So we have to be able to quantify to be able to really survive and thrive in this economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, obviously, it seems like in order to get up the ladder to the C-suite, to be honest, not just in product, you need to have business, you need to be a business acumen, you need to understand finances, right? I mean, and for someone that comes from very technical background, a lot of times those things are really foreign. We don't even know. I remember, in one of the companies I worked at, the CFO did kind of, a presentation and he shared a lot of acronyms that no one knew about, right? So how do you get yourself comfortable with those terms and get educated about it? Do you have
Yeah,
some tips?
for sure, I would say, I have an engineering background as well, and I actually use that to my advantage, right? So, in many ways, engineers are curious, they want to solve problems, right? So going in to these conversations with a curiosity mindset is actually really important. Leveraging all the resources that you have either internally in your company or externally to understand what those acronyms mean are really important as well. The next time your CFO gives a presentation, it'll probably, the jargon will probably not make a lot of sense at the first go, but making it your own personal priority to say, hey, let me get a copy of that deck. Let me try to understand what this said. They use this term called NDR or ARR. What does that actually mean? Let me try to do my own research and, try to, if you don't get the right answers, speaking to somebody in the finance org and saying, hey, I'm really interested in finding out how you measure financial outcomes. Can you walk me through this? Right. So again, it goes back to educating yourself, but continuing to ask the questions until you have a clear answer in what you're doing and how does that tie to that one acronym that your CFO brought up, right? So those would be some of the tips. And the final thing I would say here is if you get to when you get to the point where you have that clear line of sight between what you're working on and how that impacts the business, you have to keep yourself accountable to drive, to do the validation so that you know the next idea that you're working on will actually move that number. So that you're not just saying, I'm doing this because the customers will be happy, right? Or because my product person told me to do this, but going in with that strong conviction that you will actually move a number that the CFO cares about.
That's wonderful. And I can share that the people in finance, if they are approached by tech people
Uh-huh.
and those people are curious to understand financial terms, there's nothing that excites them more. They're over the top because usually they seem like those gray people with numbers, right? That no one cares about, no one wants to know what they're doing. And if someone approached them, especially, from tech background, and say, hey, I want to understand more, they're super excited. At last, someone cares about what I'm doing, right? Other than the C-suite.
That's very true. At last, somebody cares about what I'm doing. It is, being in finance, I would say, I have a lot of empathy. It is so much hard work, but a lot of people just don't understand what you do. So I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Wow, this has been incredible conversation, Navya. So many great tips. Any last words of wisdom that you want to share before we end our call today?
Um, let's see. We talked about most of the things. I would just go back to, the point that you and I discussed at length about self-advocacy, right? And if something is stopping you from putting your name out there, from being that voice, think about what that is and attack that the first. And so I would say self-advocacy is the one thing that I would encourage everybody to think about. They're really good resources. But if there's any way that I can be of help, I can be reached at LinkedIn. I love hearing from people being able to help. So please always feel free to reach out.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'll share your LinkedIn handle. And also, if you have the link to your podcast that you mentioned that you have done about a year and a half ago, I don't know if it's on your LinkedIn profile or not, but I'll be
Yeah,
happy to share that as well.
yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much, Navya. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today.
Great talking to you.